All right, my friends, welcome. It's Ty Hicks, results coach and national influence and leadership trainer. Excited to have you here today because we're going to be talking about how to handle an issue that I think is facing probably most individuals in the world to some extent or another. And if it's not affecting you directly on a regular basis, chances are that you know somebody who is afflicted by this in some form. And so I really wanted to make sure that I shared some of the key strategies I've come to understand that have really been proven to provide results for people in this specific area. So what we're talking about here today is how to handle anxiety. More specifically, how to kick anxiety's ass so that it's not going to be a problem for you any longer and that you don't have to live in perpetual fear that you're going to get, stressed out, or in the most extreme cases that you might actually induce a panic attack or something along those lines. So chances are in your day-to-day life, you probably experience some form of anxiety to some extent. It may be, you just get, kind of stressed out at work. It may be that your relationship causes you stress. It may be that there are certain elements of your life that kind of repeatedly are causing you to feel stressed out. And on the extreme end, as I mentioned, you may even suffer from panic attacks, anxiety attacks, or something like that where you just feel totally out of control. You feel like you might be hyperventilating, you're not really sure what's going to happen next. So what I wanted to do is demystify what's really happening when anxiety is being induced in us, what's happening kind of on a physiological level, how does it manifest mentally, and then how can you actually take control of it? Because believe it or not, it is something that you can control. And very often what you'll hear me say in a lot of these sorts of videos when I'm explaining how to handle things like depression or anxiety or whatever the case is that these are things that are within your control. These are not things that just happen to you externally, okay? And I really want you to get into that mindset because very often people tend to say, I have anxiety, right? And they tend to kind of emboss that on themselves as if it's a part of their identity, as if it's something that just externally transmitted itself onto them and it's nothing that they can control. And what I want to do is offer you a second perspective, a more empowering perspective where you can actually change things. And that perspective is that you don't have anxiety, you do anxiety, meaning that the feeling of becoming anxious, the feeling of having an extreme anxiety episode is actually something that you manifest internally. And once you can understand the internal components of what causes the feeling of anxiety to come together, you can actually take control of it. Emotional states are kind of like, creating an emotional state in your body is kind of like baking a cake in the sense that there's a specific recipe involved. And for instance, if you combine certain elements inside of yourself emotionally, you are going to create the emotional outcome, whether that's a desirable one or whether it's an unsavory one. And I think you're going to see exactly the clarity you need to see on what components actually create the emotion of anxiety as we talk a little bit more about that today. So the first thing that I really want to frame the conversation around is how anxiety kind of comes to pass. So the first thing that we've got to do if we want to help you beat anxiety is I've got to have you understand that you have to stop focusing on the things that you don't want, and instead we've got to get you to realize the power of focusing on what you do want. Okay, now that sounds overly simplified, but let me break that down for you because this has very consequential consequences, okay, for how you navigate this path. So first of all, let me give you this metaphor. Imagine you're driving on an icy road and all of a sudden your car starts spinning out of control. And there's a telephone pole that's on the side of the road and you're worried about hitting that pole. Well, your better nature is going to cause you to want to look directly at the pole that you do not want to hit. It's going to cause you to be fearful of running into that, right? You're going to be afraid for your life. You're going to be afraid for damaging your car. And you're going to want to, focus entirely on that telephone pole. Now, the challenge with this is that when you focus on the telephone pole, your mind, your body, your reflexes, right, your subconscious and your conscious mind kind of all sort of coordinate together to actually get you to be more likely to actually hit the pole. And they've actually done studies on this with race car drivers. who are going around the track at a very high speed, right? And what they'll do is they'll purposefully cause the racer to spin out because they want to see how the person handles it. And it's very tempting for the racer to want to look directly at the wall that they're afraid that they're going to hit. But the problem is when you look at the wall, you're that much more likely to actually hit the damn wall. So what you have to do is you have to train your mind to be able to look where it is that you want to go. And then all of a sudden, your body and your mind are able to make small little adjustments to actually get you to follow that new path that you've charted. So why do I share this metaphor with you? Well, I share this with you because this, in essence, is what's happening whenever one of us is experiencing anxiety. What's happening when we experience anxiety manifesting in our nervous system is we're actually focusing on the very place where we do not want to go. And because we're giving it such incredible focus, it becomes real to us in our minds, and it causes us to actually feel the experience of anxiety. This is how the brain works. Okay, so for instance, if I am stressed out about my child going to school, for example, and I'm worried that, on their walk to school, they're going to be in danger, something's going to happen to them, what will happen is I will first have a mental picture about my child going to school and danger befalling them, and that might cause me a little bit of anxiety. Now, where most people end up having extreme anxiety is they tend to continuously focus on the very thing that's causing them stress. And what makes it worse is as they focus on the thing that causes them to feel stressful, the stress rises up inside of them, and then they go, oh my gosh, I don't want to feel stressed, I don't want to feel stressed, I don't want to feel stressed, and they actually make the stress wrong, and they try to stifle it and push it down. And what you've now done is you've created inner conflict. And now what you're doing is you're essentially stressing about the fact that you're stressing. And this now becomes a vicious downward cycle, so that every time you go around the cycle, it gets deeper and deeper and wider, and it becomes more extreme. And this is how people end up getting into anxiety attacks, where all of a sudden their nervous system is so overloaded with this tension that they've created in their body that they can hyperventilate. Maybe their heart could, start changing its pace. Your adrenaline is going to start going, and you're going to freak out because it feels like it's something that has just happened to you. But in reality, it is something that you've created through your conscious focus in your mind. So if you can start to understand that anxiety attacks are not something that just happens to you, even though it may feel like that's the case, it's actually something that you're manifesting based on the mental patterns that you're running at the time. So that's the first big understanding you've got to understand here, because now I can show you some of the strategies of how to manipulate that process and how to make sure that stress and anxiety never derail you ever again. Okay, so let's talk about what we need to do here. So as opposed to focusing on the thing that we don't want to have happen, okay, our child getting, violence befalling them on their way to school, for example. I don't want to be thinking about that because that's going to cause me anxiety. So now what I need to do is I need to instead figure out what emotional state do I want to experience on a regular basis. So if you're experiencing anxiety on a regular basis, let me ask you, what emotion would you rather feel as kind of your center of gravity, right? I mean, and to be clear, I'm not saying that you're never going to have stress ever again, right? I'm not claiming to you that you're going to have perfect days filled with perfect emotions all the time. That's not realistic. That's not what I'm trying to go for here. But what I am trying to give you are the tools you need to increase your emotional fitness so that you can kind of have a user's manual for the brain and understand how to actually manifest the emotional states that are going to cause you to be more resourceful and move through life more powerfully, as opposed to be detrimented by these unresourceful emotions. So, for instance, what would be your ideal emotional state? Would it be joy? Would it be gratitude? Would it be exhilaration? Right? What would be the emotional state that you want to experience as opposed to stress? Because what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a real exercise that you can use where anytime you're about to feel stress, you can take yourself into this resourceful emotion. So first, let's pinpoint what is it that you want to feel. Go ahead and pick an emotion that kind of fits what it is that you want to be feeling on a regular basis. Okay, that's what we want to figure out. All right, now the next thing that we want to do, and you might need pen and paper for this, is I want you to identify all the stimuli that cause the anxiety response. Okay, so if it's thinking about your kid on their way to school, go ahead and write that. If it's any time your romantic partner raises their voice and you get stressed and anxious about that, go ahead and write that down. Really think about a real day, right? Think about yourself going through your normal day. Think about all the little moments that are going to cause you to feel stressful. And I really want you to get as specific as possible, right? Because, for instance, it's not just anytime your romantic partner raises their voice. It may be anytime they raise their voice to a certain level, when they have a certain tone, or when they're insinuating a certain thing, right? You want to get as specific as you possibly can, and that's going to become important in a moment. So, and by the way, if you're not taking action with this, then you might as well just turn this video off. You've probably heard me say that to you before, but everything that I share with you is meant for you to actually be able to use it to get real results. So if you want to be able to handle anxiety, you've got to follow these steps, okay? So first, determine your target state. What's the emotion you want to be experiencing as opposed to anxiety? Pick that, write that down. Next, identify all these stimuli that cause you to feel anxiety. You should take a solid 2 to 3 minutes on this. So go ahead and pause me now and do that and write that out. Okay, now that we've gotten that, one thing we need to talk about here is a concept called submodalities. So let me share an example. Obviously, I'm going to maintain the identity of my client as confidential, but I'm going to share with you the story that they came to me with, that I helped them with, because they were experiencing severe, what they called depression, and what they called extreme anxiety. And what I ended up showing them was that it was really kind of a mental recipe that they were putting together in their mind that was creating those severe emotional states. So here's what was happening. The client had a relationship with an individual, and the individual that he had a friendship with was destructive in his sense of the world, right? The friend would say things that would put him down. The friend would use a tone that would make him feel inadequate and inferior. The friend had certain sort of ways to kind of dig at the client, okay? And so the client tended to describe his circumstances as saying, they're manipulative, they're extreme, they're the worst person in the world, and I'm so depressed, I'm so incapable of controlling myself around them. And what I wanted to make sure that I could help my client understand is that these feelings of depression and anxiety were not things that were externally happening to him. They were things that he was manifesting inside of his own mind through the power of submodalities. So let me explain what I mean by this. So what I did is I asked him, okay, I want you to think about a time that made you incredibly stressful, okay? Now I want you to think about it, and I want you to think about what was happening. And what he described to me was that his friend had said a particular sentence to him. And I asked him to focus on the volume and the tone of the friend saying the thing that they were saying to him that was causing him to feel stressed out. So I really wanted him to get specific about how it was that they were saying what they were saying, and it was inducing the response. And so then, I had him kind of close his eyes and visualize this. And then I said to him, okay, now what I want you to do is raise the volume of the voice. Does that make you feel better or worse? And he said, it makes me feel worse, which is the response I was expecting. And then I said, okay, now I want you to make that inner voice that's saying this thing a whisper. Okay, so I want you to hear it as a whisper. And I said, does that make you feel better or worse? And he said, a little bit better, which is the response I was expecting. And I said, okay, fantastic. Now what I want you to do is I want you to take that mean tone, and I actually want you to have the voice, right, say what it would say to you normally that would cause you to be stressed out, but now I want you to hear it in a Daffy Duck voice. And all of a sudden he just started busting out laughing. And what I was doing with him is I was helping him train himself on how to manipulate his mental submodalities. Okay, so when we talk about submodalities, here's what we mean. When you represent a thought or a memory inside of your brain, you use a current set of submodalities, and these roughly correspond with the senses, okay? So for example, you may remember a memory very visually. Some people are very, very visual in how they represent the world. They think in pictures and movies. Some people, however, don't really think in pictures and movies and instead think in terms of sounds much more strongly. When they remember a memory, they keenly remember the sounds and the auditory experience as opposed to the visuals. Okay? Some people are more kinesthetic, meaning that they get an emotional sense more so in their body first as opposed to their mind. These individuals are much more in tune with their feelings, frankly. So if they remember a memory, they're going to be more in tune with how they literally felt physically in that specific moment. Okay? So you guaranteed have some sort of submodality that is probably your center of gravity. A good chunk of people are visual. Probably the next most common one that I've experienced are auditory oriented people, and then kinesthetic after that. But everybody has these submodalities to some extent or another. We all make use of them to some extent or another. Now, the client that I was working with happened to be a very auditory centered individual. So it was no surprise why he was getting stressed out when his friend was using a harsh, judgmental tone with him whenever, she would say the things that she would say to him, and it was causing him to feel anxious. And so what I helped him understand was it wasn't the fact that she was saying the things that she was saying that was causing him to feel anxious. It was how he was representing what she was saying in his mind and how he was repetitively repeating that sequence in his mind in a way that was causing him to feel anxious, meaning he took the things that she said and he was repeating them in his mind continuously, playing them at a volume that was high, hearing them at a tone that was harsh, and that would cause anybody to feel stressed out and anxious, right? So what I did is I helped him see that he could take that current pattern that he was running inside of his mind and he could interrupt it. He could actually break it apart and he could make it something that wouldn't cause him to be stressed out, but cause him to feel laughter and cause him to feel lightness of being as opposed to heaviness. And what we're doing here, by the way, when we're adjusting the stimuli that are causing you to feel stressed out, is if you think of it, the pattern that's causing you to feel stressed out is kind of like a CD, right? If you think of your mind as sort of a jukebox, and if I press a certain couple of buttons, it's going to cause a certain CD to come out and be played. That's what's happening when you're getting stressed out. What's getting you stressed out is you either hear something in a tone and in a volume that's causing you to be stressed, or if you're a very visually oriented person, you might be visualizing a picture or a movie in your head, and because it's very vivid and large and detailed and bright, it actually is going to make you feel stressed. But if you were to dim the picture, if you were to make it black and white, if you were to turn it into a still image, if you were to shrink the image down to size in your mind, all of a sudden the feeling of stress literally vanishes. So what I'm talking about here, you might be thinking like, this sounds like a little out there, Ty. This sounds a little weird. I mean, why are you sharing this with me? Well, I'm sharing this with you because I'm literally telling you how your brain works. The way your brain works is that it thinks in terms of pictures, sounds, and feelings. And from those pictures, sounds, and feelings, depending on how they are represented, it induces in you an emotional response. So my question to you is this: do you want to be, sort of a blind automaton that's just having emotional reactions to things based off how you're already pre-wired? Or do you want to help take control of how your brain manifests emotions so that you can experience the most resourceful ones that will cause you to feel, powerful, and move through life powerfully? That's my real question to you. So if you're a visually oriented person, let me tell you how you're going to manipulate the submodalities in your current, frame of mind. So if you have a memory that is very large in your mind, and it's vivid, and it's detailed, and it's bright, you can do a lot of those things I just mentioned. Try, in your mind, visualizing turning it into a still image. Try turning it black and white. And what you'll notice is all of a sudden the emotional stress will be diminished greatly just by adjusting that image. And so what you're going to do is interrupt that pattern by manipulating it in one of these ways. You could also white out the image. If you imagine kind of a knob on the TV of your mind, you can imagine whiting it out. And if you do that enough times, it actually makes it so that the image does no harm to you anymore. It no longer is going to cause you stress. Now, you may have to do this several times. Okay, now remember I mentioned to you the jukebox idea? So, the point here is for you to understand that right now your mind has got a sort of pre-programmed set of memories. And so, if you bring forward that memory of that friend saying that thing in that particular tone, you're going to feel stressed. Just like if I push a couple of buttons on the jukebox, that CD is going to come out and play. That's the pattern that's going to play. Now, what we're doing by manipulating these submodalities is taking that CD and scratching it, and scratching it and scratching it and scratching it so that it will never play exactly the same way again. So that's what you've got to be able to do here. You've got to be creative. So again, let's kind of wind back, because I know we've talked about a lot here. What you should have done is determined your target state, right? What's the emotion that you want to experience on a regular basis as opposed to stress? Now, number two, you should have identified the stimuli that are actually causing you to feel stressed. And now what you need to do is identify what those mental submodalities are. So think about the specific moments or the specific memory that's causing you to feel stressed. Earlier, I gave an example of visualizing my child, on their way to school, and violence coming to them or something along those lines. So I'm actually a visually oriented person. So if this were something I were experiencing, I would be visualizing that in my mind, and that would be causing me stress. So what I would do instead is I would take that large picture in my mind and I would shrink it and shrink it and shrink it until it's microscopic, and then I would dust away the picture in my mind. And all of a sudden that feeling of stress literally vanishes. Now if the picture comes back, guess what I have to do? I need to do it again. I need to shrink it down to size and just brush it off like a little dust speck. Or I could turn it into black and white, or I could run it backwards, or I could put funny music behind it. Okay, any of these things are going to be ways for us to manipulate the submodalities. I gave you a lot of examples if you're an auditory-oriented individual as well. So you need to figure out how is it that you're representing the memory, and then adjust it, make it fun, interrupt it, okay, and change it and distort it so that it no longer phases you. And this is now going to be the strategy that you can use whenever you have one of those recurring patterns that's upsetting you. You now know how you can interrupt the pattern. And once you've done that enough times, you're literally creating new neural connections up here in your brain so that you will be less likely to actually automatically feel stressed. And instead, you might actually condition yourself to more automatically feel laughter or feel lightheartedness because you've brought that sort of new manipulation to the experience of how you represent the memory in your mind, okay? Now, does this seem weird? Does it seem cool? I geek out about this stuff. When I found out that this is like how emotions are created and that we can literally manifest whatever emotional states we want to manifest, I mean, holy cow, that is like the secret sauce, my friend. That's how you can now do whatever it is that you want to do. If you want to feel more joy, you want to feel more gratitude, it's about you recreating the memories in your mind that's going to make you feel those states so that you flood your nervous system with them, and then you can go out into the world and move powerfully through it because you've got yourself emotionally primed with that state. See, most people are getting emotionally primed out of reaction, right? They're getting primed to be stressed, primed to be anxious, as opposed to intentionally designing how it is that they want to show up and using these tools to actually tangibly create that process in the mind, okay? Now, number 5 is going to be to do exactly that, to condition the target state. So remember at the beginning of this, you picked an emotional state that you want to be feeling instead of stress, right? Now, here's what you need to do. Take a minute and go ahead and just close your eyes really quick. And what I want you to do is remember a time where you felt the way that you want to feel regarding this specific emotion. So if the emotion you picked is gratitude, grateful, then think of a memory where you felt immensely grateful. If it is exhilarated, excited, find a memory that corresponds with one of those emotions. So go ahead and find the memory. And now here's what I want you to do. Close your eyes and go ahead and visualize or, just focus on that memory as best as you possibly can. Make it as detailed as you possibly can. Think of every little detail that made it special. See what you were seeing, hear what you were hearing, feel what you were feeling in as much vivid detail as you possibly can. And all of a sudden what should happen is you should start actually feeling the actual feeling that's associated with that memory. And if you're having trouble with this, just focus on it more vividly and more intensely. See what you were seeing, hear what you were hearing, feel what you were feeling. And all of a sudden, you're going to start realizing that the emotion is literally flooding your nervous system. So remember at the beginning of this, where I mentioned to you that we need to stop focusing on where we don't want to go, right? We need to stop focusing on the pole that we don't want to hit, and instead we have to focus on the place where we do want to drive the car to. This is what you're learning how to do now. You're taking your focus away from the very thing that's causing you stress, and you're focusing instead on the very thing that could cause you to feel lightheartedness and an ability to move more powerfully through life. There's a quote that I think of from Martin Luther King that I think exemplifies this perfectly. He said, hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. So in the same way, you're never going to be able to remove stress from your world by getting stressed about your stress. What you've got to do is when you feel stressed, you need to move into feeling and thinking about this target emotional state. Because when you focus on feeling gratitude, you cannot feel stressed. It's impossible. But if you focus on being stressed and wish that you weren't stressed, you now are going to become more stressed about how stressed you are. And that's the problem. So what you focus on becomes real to you in your mind. And so if you want to beat anxiety, follow these steps, interrupt the stressful patterns, and condition that new target state. And all of a sudden, you will feel stress very, very rarely. And even when you do, you'll know exactly how to get yourself back to where you need to go. So I hope this was valuable to you. My next video I'm very excited to be sharing with you. It's on how to achieve radical change. So if you're tired of just getting those little, small little incremental victories, but instead you're ready to make some really massive changes, keep an eye out because this next video is going to show you exactly what secret factor it is that you need to tap into to make that happen. So I hope you found this valuable. I hope you're able to have some new tools to be able to handle your stress more effectively now. Go out there, move powerfully through life, move with purpose, and have an excited day. I'll talk to you again soon.